All right, everyone, the lamestream media is declaring that it's like, oh, it's total gridlock under Donald Trump and, we had a little shutdown, nothing's working. Are you insane? Look, you look back years to when Obama was president and the Tea Party held disproportionate control in the House. That's when we had gridlock in this country. Nothing got for several years. Almost nothing was actually done. Obama just said fuck it and started going on more foreign visits because he couldn't work with John Boehner. And Paul Ryan gets in there, it's even fucking worse. The Senate was, only half cooperative, and the Senate can't do jack shit without the consent of the House being along with them. So it was a pointless endeavor. Nothing was accomplished. For several years, nothing was done. In his first year in office, Trump has managed to pass comprehensive tax reform, rip apart a bunch of regulations, enacted a travel ban that will go before the Supreme Court, or I believe the injunction was actually taken off pending the Supreme Court case, so that's basically a win. He was praised for his Venezuela response. I would say I'm not happy with his response so far in Syria or with the Cuban crisis, which is basically what it is. Also, by the way, I haven't heard anything more about that so-called sonic device that some people there were using to attack the U.S. Embassy. I wonder why I haven't heard any more about that. Could it be top secret? Probably is. By and large, though, Trump has accomplished quite a few things. North Korea, his maneuvering there diplomatically has actually managed to get China largely on the side of the U.S. That's significant. People don't even realize how significant it is. And then, of course, immigration reform. Now, it's an ongoing negotiation, but Rome wasn't built in a day. And by the way, isn't it nice to have a president who actually does negotiating as opposed to Obama, who would sit there and say, I'm not going to bend at all, I'm 100% rigid, my enemies are racists. That's basically what it boiled down to. Obama was not a negotiating figure. He was more like a Jimmy Carter, basically, do it my way or take the fucking highway. And that's why nothing was accomplished. That's why there was gridlock at the time. Trump's more like, hey, we can shake hands and talk about this all day, I don't give a fuck. There are some basic things I'm not backing down on, everything else is malleable. His platform's so malleable, he'll even come out and countermand his own previous statements from time to time, which can be a discredit to him at times. But I think personally most of it's calculated. It's just like these leaks from the White House or whatever. He'll say, oh, this is the leaked draft of Trump's, proposal to ban windows that are, multicolored or something. When he does that, it's usually because he wants people to react and he wants to see what the public sort of reaction will be. Whether it's mostly positive, mostly negative, somewhere in the middle. What are people's other proposals that seem common? Hell, maybe the lamestream media even does a poll on it. And then he can get even better numbers to work with. Fudge numbers, but he can unskew them a little. And when he does that, it means that his popularity is higher than it would otherwise be. It's actually a genius move because he's under constant fire by propagandists right now. Just as many content creators on YouTube are under fire 24/7 by propagandists at this point. He knows that in order to weather that, he has to make his decisions carefully. He'd rather go more slowly and be very careful in negotiating and selectively leaking material so that he can see people's responses, so that he knows that he can minimize the damage of any real ideological assault upon his platform. It's a very wise decision he's done. But we've got plenty accomplished in his first year. Think, it's not even the midterms. What did Obama do in his first year, when he had the consent of Congress fully? He didn't do anything. In the first half of his first term, when he had the Senate and the House, prior to, I believe, a couple special elections in the first year, he didn't do jack shit. And then all of a sudden he got antsy and wanted to do everything once the Tea Party tidal wave came through. By the way, there's going to be no comparable Democratic wave. That's almost certain at this point. Trump would have to come out. You would have to have a leaked video of Trump wiping his dick on the Lincoln portrait in order to get him to be unpopular enough to affect the state races anyway. Ultimately, there it boils down to partisan loyalty and turnout in many cases for the competitive ones. Elsewhere, it boils down to how much money can be rigged into the race. And, look at Koch, just pledged, $200 million or some crazy total? That's going to go a long way towards negating the fact that most corporations at this point want the Democrats back in power. Most corporations and banks are on the Clintonian Democrat side. They don't like the progressives, they don't like the populists, they certainly don't like the alt-right. They don't like the new right, they don't like libertarianism. because the libertarians would force them to be in a competitive environment for the first time in 100 fucking years. So no, they're gonna back the neoliberals and the never Trumpers, basically. Woohoo! So to see the cocks get involved, it's almost like a weird situation where the cocks, that normally they fund like the slimy Paul Ryan suckers, it actually looks like they might do Trump a solid. Maybe Trump's got some dirt on them and said, hey, you better loosen up the fucking purse strings, because otherwise there might be a little bit of a problem here. That'd be funny. You know, if he was actually parasitizing the Koch brothers, I would find that to be the funniest thing ever, because I'm not a fan of like Koch politics. They claim to be libertarian. They left that behind a long time ago, dude. People keep saying that the Kochs are libertarians, or they're involved in the Libertarian Party. Yeah, 30 years ago, when their platform was different. 30 years ago when they said, hey, we can turn this into a corporatist movement. Look, the Libertarian Party went full ANCAP on the fiscal side. The only thing that they have in common at this point with the establishment is they want you to have to bake the fucking cake and not build a wall, which I think are two things that the libertarians are not quite libertarian on, but that's just my opinion. My humble opinion as somebody who actually is very supportive of like the Ron Paul element of that movement. It was a good thing. Then, of course, Gary Johnson takes hold and basically says, oh, you know, we should just all smoke weed together, man. That's libertarianism. Well, no, of course, that didn't work quite as well as he thought that it would. You know, Clinton would-be voters aside. Or would-be Bernie voters, rather. But no, there's no gridlock. There's no gridlock in D.C. The main gridlock has come, oddly enough, from Republican holdouts. Because the Democrats don't have the House or Senate, so there's not a whole lot they can do to stand in the way. But then you get someone like Mitch McConnell, like the ACA. We could have gotten ACA reform. Mitch McConnell says to Trump, don't worry, I'll handle this, and has his cronies design the plan. Trump's like, oh, well, this isn't really generous, and no, at the last minute, he's like, I'm not even going to bother supporting this. And so it falls apart. And then there was Ryan Care, and Ryan Care didn't even get off the ground like McConnell Care. It gets off of the runway and smashes into a tree. Ryan Care, he forgets to put gas in the tank, and so it never even gets off the runway in the first place. Rand Care was a great idea, but then, of course, someone comes along and sabotages his fuselage. That's basically what ends up happening. And then you have possible Trump Care in the future. But really, all that is hey, you know, you're not going to have to pay the 2% penalty for not having health care. He rips apart the mandate part. Well, that's really all you need to do. Who cares about the rest of it anyway? Oddly enough, Trump's, by changing one thing out of a million, and the ACA actually improved it more than Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan would have, with comprehensive so-called reform packages that really weren't reform at all. Oh yeah, you don't have to pay a mandate anymore, but if your insurance lapses, you're going to have to pay part of that plan's value to the private company. You know, as though that's constitutional anyway. It's totally moronic. Paul Ryan is such an idiot. My God, they should get rid of him. Get rid of Paul Ryan and John McCain and Mitch McConnell and all these rhinos, all these fake conservatives, and you probably wouldn't have any gridlock at all. Look, the Republican Party would be lock, stock, and barrel, a well-oiled machine. The Democrats would still have no power, and then you could invoke the nuclear option if you really need to. That would be just fine. Why don't you invoke it for a while, then restore it, and then permanently lock it off from being invoked in the future, like change the Senate rules or something. Pass a constitutional amendment. Look, another thing is that Trump would have gotten even more stuff accomplished, more quickly at least, if it hadn't been for the meddling of the Ninth Circuit. But that's not Trump's fault. The Ninth Circuit saying, oh, well, the travel ban is unconstitutional, twice, in several forms. And then the Supreme Court has to come and smack him down and say, no, it's fine, it can go on while we wait to hear the case. You're not going to sit there standing in the way of the federal government having to operate on behalf of the safety of the American people, basically. Now, it was very, very funny. People, they're blaming it on Trump. So the Ninth Circuit is far out there. That would be like if an extremely conservative sitting federal judge were to have stood in the way of everything Obama wanted to do. If that had happened, you wouldn't have blamed Obama now, would you? Nor would any sane person. They'd say, well, why don't you put this on hold, let it go through, and then see what the Supreme Court has to say. It doesn't make sense that some random federal judge put in by some other former president can prevent a current president from doing their job at a whim. It just doesn't make sense to me. And the fact that the Supreme Court was, I believe, unanimously against holding up the injunction and letting it, they wanted to let it go forth while they considered the case. That's quite telling. It's also telling about what their final decision is going to be, because if they were clearly against the idea of the travel ban being a presidential power, then they would definitely leave the injunction in place. Because they wouldn't want to be. Do you think the Supreme Court wants to face the ire of the entire lamestream media when it says, "Oh, the Supreme Court found it unlawful, but they let the ban be in effect for the last few months"? What are they thinking? Obviously, they have dementia or something. They wouldn't like that at all. So yeah, there's no gridlock. The government is oddly enough working more well than it was under Obama. Mainly, the gridlock comes from the McConnells, who are fake conservatives. They're just neoliberals or neocons, same thing. And then a handful of people in the Senate who happen to be Democrats that aren't willing to negotiate on anything. A lot of the Democrats have been receptive. Even the Schumers are willing to shake Trump's hand. They'll back away from things and then they'll go back in. Trump does the same thing. It's tit for tat. Then there are some that are zealots and they're like, nope, we're not going to do anything. I wonder who could possibly be who's like that in the U.S. Senate. I think there are multiple individuals we can think of, not all who have D's after their name. John McCain. It's rather funny. That's about all. Peace out.